What happens to us after we die? Do we cease to exist, or do we live on? This may be the biggest question that mankind has ever asked, as well as what this podcast is about. In this show, we will examine past life memories, speak with professional hypnotherapists, astral projection practitioners, psychics, and much more, all in an attempt to decipher this riddle. So welcome to the puzzle. Welcome to the Regression Session. Welcome back to the Regression Session. My name is Ian. This week we're going to be hearing from Simon Bown, and Simon is the host of the Past Lives podcast. He has a diploma in clinical hypnotherapy with the UK National Council for Hypnotherapy. He's certified in past life regression therapy with the Past Life Awakening Institute, and to top it all off, he's a member of the International Practitioners of Holistic Medicine. He took part in his first past life regression at 1987 at the College of Psychic Studies in London, and that experience had a profound enough impact on him that he went on to start the Past Lives podcast. In this episode, we talk about past life regression, healing, consciousness, aliens, and lots of other stuff, and so I'm excited for you guys to hear what he has to say. If you want to come onto the podcast to share your experience with past lives or your knowledge in any metaphysical topic, shoot me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com. I promise you I will respond. Head on over to my Facebook, my Twitter. I post bios that people send me that are guests. I post additional bonus content sometimes. I post memes. I link to other creators. I do the show updates there. So head on over. It's the Regression Session podcast on Facebook and at Regression Session on Twitter. And now my conversation with Simon. Hey Simon, thanks for coming on to the show.
Pleasure to be here.
If you don't mind just kind of introducing yourself, giving a little bit of context about who you are, what you do, what you got going on, and then we can just start talking.
Okay, well, I'm a qualified clinical hypnotherapist. I got a diploma in the UK from the National Council of Hypnotherapy, and I learned to do all that hypnotherapy stuff, like stopping smoking and losing weight. But what I was really interested in was taking people through past life regressions. And that's because I've had an interest in this for so many decades, which makes me sound really old. I'm not that old, but it was a thing where I had such an interest and I listened to so many podcasts about it. I started my own podcast and now I'm up to nearly 190 episodes, and it's called the Past Lives Podcast. And I talk to people there. It's usually an hour-long interview with somebody. It might be to do with reincarnation, but I also talk to people who have near-death experiences, and I talk to researchers, mediums, all sorts of people, all to do with the past lives and the afterlife and consciousness. And so it's really great to come and talk to another podcaster like you, because I'm always the one asking the questions, and now I can relax and I'll be the victim, and you can ask the questions.
Yeah, and you've even got episodes of people talking about aliens. And when I first got into this kind of stuff, aliens couldn't have been farther from my mind, and I would have never thought that aliens were even a part of this or related to this in any way. But then you get into it, and they're actually a really big part of it, which is really, really weird.
Yeah, it used to be a thing, isn't it? Maybe years or decades ago, you'd have people who are really into UFOs, and then people who are interested in the afterlife. And they'd never come together. but we've started to see there are connections that are really interesting. Because people who have near-death experiences have after effects where they can't wear watches because they just don't work, and sometimes electrical items don't work, and they have amazing synchronicities and psychic flashes. And then they find people have been claimed to have been abducted by aliens, and I still don't know if that's real or what that really means, but they have the same after effects as somebody who's had a near-death experience. So there's something of a connection there. And also, over time, I've read so many books, and in the alien abduction stuff, I've read about aliens referring to humans as containers or vessels. It's like the container of the soul. And also the aliens of, I'm calling them aliens, the ETs, the visitors, whatever you want to call them, they talk about themselves and how their bodies might last 200 or 300 years. And when it's worn out, they just move to another body, which just sounds like reincarnation. And then there's a guest I had on who was woken up one night and found herself standing next to her bed. And there were these 4 aliens, these classic ETs, the greys, standing at the bottom of her bed, and it freaked her out. And she looked round and she saw she was still in bed. Her body was there, and she realized this was some kind of out-of-body experience. And then as soon as that realization came, she was back in her body, and she sat up, and there were no greys in the room. So it was kind of like the greys were in the astral plane, if we could call it that. And when she went out of body, she was also in the astral plane, which that's how she could see them. So it seems like the aliens can move in some kind of, like through what they call the veil into the afterlife. So the ETs are well aware of what's going on. And then we move further down the rabbit hole there. Whitley Strieber, who is a guest on my podcast, and he wrote that really successful book in the late 80s called Communion about his alien abduction experiences. And he would say that sometimes in his cabin, he would have visitors who wanted to see the ETs because he'd read the books and they were friends of his, and that they would have visits from deceased relatives. It's like the dead would turn up around the same time the ETs would turn up. And if you talk to Whitley Strieber, he goes so far into all this stuff. I mean, I might sound crazy right now, but he talks about it so matter-of-factly about how he's written a book recently with his wife, and his wife died a few years ago, but she just comes through and he can just write out all this stuff she tells him. So it's kind of this weird connection, different connections we can see there with the alien abduction and with the afterlife. And it's like a jigsaw, we can look at reincarnation, children with past life memories, and past life regression, where people confirm the lives that they see during the past life regression. And then these ET stuff that kind of crosses over with it, and this big jigsaw puzzle, and you've got a few of the pieces, but we haven't got anywhere near all of them, but we're starting to get an idea of what the picture is.
Yeah, so I like that.
I didn't go too far off topic there, did I?
No, you're totally good. I like that a lot. Actually, in my podcast intro, I say welcome to the puzzle, because I look at this whole thing nowadays as like a giant puzzle, exactly like what you said. So I'm really glad you said that. I've actually talked to a few astral projection practitioners who said the same thing. Like you can be abducted physically, but you can also be abducted by aliens or ETs or whatever you want to call them, on an astral level. So like your body doesn't move, and skeptics would just be like, yeah, that's a hallucination. But then they have those after effects too, which that begs the question, where does that actually come from?
Yeah. And I've read about a couple of people who've talked about being abducted, and when they were with the ETs, they could just walk around fine, but in their usual life, they've got a limp because they're disabled. Or there was somebody who said they needed really strong glasses, but when they were with the ETs, they weren't wearing their glasses and their sight was perfect. So that kind of suggests that they were out of their body, but they didn't quite, it wasn't that obvious to them that they'd been abducted in that way, except for these clues.
Yeah, it's just really, really interesting. And kind of moving in a different direction, you mentioned someone who wrote a or who claims to have written a book with their deceased wife, and you've had a couple of these people on your show that say that, yeah, I've written a book with my deceased so and so. I think you had a gentleman on one point that had said he had written a book with his son who had passed away named Jordan or something like that. What's your take on that?
It's I find it very interesting because it's I think he did it through automatic writing, which is when you just kind of relax and you just leave your hand over a bit of paper with a pen, right, and then it just starts writing. And there's so much detail and so much information of what he was saying that tallies with lots of other things that I've heard, maybe from people who have had near-death experiences or mediums. I mean, if the guy was hoaxing it, he could have read all the stuff I've read and got all that information. But it's still, I find it fascinating. And one of the goals of my podcast is that I get a guest on and I get them to present their information the best way they can. And I leave it to the listener to make up their own minds of whether or not to believe what they hear. But it's quite interesting what he's had to say. And I think he's been on the show twice, on my podcast twice. And he seems like a very straightforward guy, and doesn't seem like he would just be making up all this stuff.
Right. And as far as like automatic writing goes, do you know who Joanne DiMaggio is?
No, I don't.
So she studied Edgar Casey's work, like really, really hardcore, I guess is the best way to put it. She says that Edgar Casey is her greatest teacher. And she invented something called soul writing, which is similar to automatic writing, but you actually call in what she calls white light protection. And she claims that automatic writing is one of the biggest no-nos you can do for developing your psychic ability or for developing spiritually. She says it's right up there with Ouija boards because she claims that it can open you up for possession.
Right. I don't know about that stuff because you call it possession and it sounds kind of religious in a way, and you start thinking of demons and that side of stuff. But I was never religious. All my upbringing, all my friends I've ever had in my life, no one's ever been religious. And so I'm kind of on the outside of religion, looking at it from an outsider's perspective. And when I hear the word demons and think of how religious it is, that turns me off. And I think there might be something there that's some kind of entity that could be negative. But if you call it a demon, then you're putting a label on it that's got a lot of baggage with it. And you might start thinking of that film, The Exorcist, and priests, and also with Ouija boards. Somebody said to me what it is with them is it's the same as if you lived in a bad neighborhood and you opened your front door and just started shouting out, "Hey, everybody come inside." And all the drug addicts and the thieves are coming into your house and you're like, "Yeah, everybody inside." So I don't know about Ouija boards as well. There's suggestions that it's about people subconsciously move that thing around the board. But when I was 17 or 18, I was with some friends and we did it. And there was 3 or 4 of us on the board and then other people. And it started spelling out stuff that just didn't make sense. It seemed like random numbers and we were writing it down. And there's somebody there who did not have their hand on the thing. His mother was German and he could read and write German as well as English. He said, "No, that's German that's coming through." And those of us controlling the thing on the board, we couldn't read or write German, but somehow German language was coming through us onto that thing.
And that's really interesting to me too. Like, where did that come from? Who knows?
Yeah.
Who knows? And sorry for jumping around. just kind of go wherever the conversation leads, to be honest with you. And what you were talking about as far as like um entities and demons go, I grew up very religious. So have you ever heard of Mormons?
Yeah, yeah.
I grew up Mormon, and then I left, and the whole journey led me to starting my show. And you're absolutely right about as far as like the word possession, it does carry a lot of baggage. I have had in my sessions, I have had entities show up in my sessions that if you were religious, you might describe them as demonic, but it's kind of weird. If you call them demons, they get even more aggressive. It's weird. I don't even know what I'm trying to say, but like if you give them that label, then that's what they kind of reflect back to you in a way. I don't know if you've ever experienced anything like that.
So you're saying you have a client who you're taking through a past life regression, and they tell you that's what they're seeing.
Yeah. So basically, I've had a little girl come through one time. Okay. She literally told me she was a ghost. She came through my sister because she's in the middle of the regression. She goes, Ian, and I said, yeah. And she said, I don't think I'm one of Taylor's past lives. I said, well, okay. Well, what are you? And she said, I think I'm a ghost. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, that's kind of weird. What are you doing here? And she's like, I was invited here. And I was like, well, I didn't invite you. So what do you mean you were invited here? So that was my first experience. And then I did like a spontaneous hypnosis for somebody who I just felt really drawn to, and they felt like they kind of needed it, because I do this thing called energy protection and shielding. And I was just doing that, like it's like a visualization where you take someone into where their solar plexus is in their chakra center, like in the center of their body, and you help them visualize taking that energy and pushing it around them, and it helps them to feel like really safe and secure and stuff like that. So it's just like a little therapeutic visualization. But she entered into a trance where she had described this massive demon looking dude picking her up before in a cave by her neck, and then started like draining her energy, and she felt really drained. And so yeah, that's kind of what happened there, and I helped her to remove him from the cave, basically.
Yeah, yeah. It's weird, isn't it? And that's one of those things in hypnosis. You don't know if it's just a subconscious metaphor or a symbol of something.
Yeah, and who's to say, and I always say this, I say this pretty much every episode of my show, regardless of whether or not it's real, it's still a real experience.
Yeah, yeah. Because I took somebody into a past life, and then they said I'm in a cave and I'm really scared, and they're coming to get me. And I was like, who's coming to get you? And she said, well, they're kind of human sized, but they're like rats, and they're going to catch me. And then she was kind of saying, but I don't think I'm in a human body. I don't think I'm a human. And then another time I took somebody and they said, I'm in a desert, and it's a rocky desert and it's very flat. And then she was silent for a while, and I had to say, so what's happening? She says, I've got too many knees. Both of my legs, there's two knees in each leg. It's like I'm not human. So they're a couple of weird things that you remind me of there, and particularly with the rats. But she said they weren't actually rats, like human-sized rats. That's just something they reminded her of.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's really weird. So there's all these weird things that happen, and that's why I've moved away from calling it past life regression and just call it spiritual hypnosis nowadays, because I actually one really interesting thing, and I think you'll find this really interesting. It's a huge long story. I talked to Dr. Koloski about this on like a really basic level, but and I actually have the recording. I'm going to release the recording as an episode, but I was hypnotized into quote unquote a regression, but it wasn't a regression. I call it what's called spirit rescue. So you're taken to, I don't know. I don't know what it is, but it kind of feels like you're taken to like some kind of like a spirit, like a shard of a spirit or a fragment of a spirit. I don't feel like it's a full spirit. So maybe like a piece of someone who is stuck in a trauma loop. So almost like if you've seen the movie Groundhog Day, just reliving their trauma over and over again.
Yeah.
And I haven't got enough information about what this means. But when you're in hypnosis, you just kind of say what's happening. You don't try to analyze it. But I was taken to this scene with this guy named Bart, and my whole entire demeanor changed, and I started talking in a southern accent like this. And he starts describing this scene where he'd had a really, really nice day. He was on like an excursion, like an old school coming of age trip where he just went off into the forest for a couple months to live off the land just to prove he could do it. His dad or his father had purchased him a brand new Winchester rifle, is what he says.
Yeah.
And he took it with him, and he was like, I'm out of shot, which, bullets. I'm out of bullets. I'm almost out of bullets. So he's starting to head back home so that he doesn't run out of shot or ammunition when he's up there, because that's what he relies on to hunt. So he goes to this meadow. He has a really nice day. He talks about how he ate some hardtack. He didn't call it hardtack, but he described hardtack. He comes down, and he just had he was just stressing like how nice of a day he had. He'd found like a little animal trail that went for like a mile or two in the straight in the direction he was going. So he just followed this animal trail. It was really, really easy going day, and he found this beautiful meadow. Then he comes to this clearing, and he shoots himself a rabbit, and he makes himself some stew. He throws the hardtack in the stew, and he eats it, which was really interesting. I actually found out after the fact that that's what they would do, is they would put this hardtack into stew. I didn't actually know that beforehand, so that's interesting. And it got dark. There was a little tiny tree next to him, and he's just kind of laying down on his left side with his left elbow propping up his head, just kind of dozing off by the fire. His tent set up behind him. His rifle was leaning against his tent, and then he hears this sound off to his left in the forest, and it was just like a bwah kind of a sound, and it sounded to him and to me, living that experience, like a human, like a man going bwah in the forest, and that scared him. So what he did is he jumps up, he grabs his rifle because it scared him, and he runs over to this little tiny tree, and this little tree couldn't have been more than I don't know. To me, it's like 6 inches around. So I don't know. I know that the measurements are different. So pretty small tree.
Yeah.
And maybe like a little bit bigger than a baseball bat up like at the very top for anybody listening. But he leans against this tree and he points his rifle in the direction that came from, because he was still thinking human, right? And I was thinking like, oh man, there's someone out there messing with him, like whatever. So he's pointing his rifle, and then he hears this, like the best way I can describe it is this. It sounded almost like a tiger growl, like a really low tiger growl, or maybe like an alligator or a crocodile growl, if anybody's ever heard that. And that scared him even more. And then a branch snaps, just like a big old crack. And then these two big pine trees, they start shaking back and forth. So just like whipping back and forth. And at that point, he was really, really scared. So he shot his rifle into the air. And after that happened, everything went quiet for a couple seconds. And then this scream came out of the forest from that direction, just like a massive, like, ah, scream. I get goosebumps whenever I think about it, because it was so loud. It was so scary. And at that point, he was completely in shock and terrified. And then after the scream stopped, and the scream went on for, I want to say maybe like 40-45 seconds. And then out of the woods, and this couldn't have been farther from my mind, Simon. This was the last thing I was expecting. Out of the woods steps this Sasquatch. It's like 9-10 feet tall. It's massive, and it's giving him this look like, I'm gonna kill you. You disgust me. It was like this disgusted look. And at that point, the kid Bart, he pees himself because he was so scared, and he was thinking. And at that point, I felt like someone removed me from his body, and I think I said, they're not going to let me experience this part, because this is when stuff kind of goes down, right? But he was thinking really quickly, like, my only chance to maybe survive this is if I shoot this thing in the face, because it's too big and I'm not going to stop it with a body shot. So as he's thinking this, and this Sasquatch, if you want to call it that, is like maybe 20 yards away from him at most. And it takes like 3 or 4 steps, and it's on top of him. It smacks the gun out of his hand, and it rips his left arm off. And then it rips his right arm off. And it's pretty graphic, but he fell down to his knees, and the Sasquatch like grabbed his rib cage and smashed his ribs, and then ripped his legs off, and then pulled his head off. And then he was gone. And then I was outside of his body, and what was really kind of interesting is this Sasquatch, it looks at me outside of his body. And I felt this like massive headache after that, because the only way I can describe it is like this Sasquatch was attacking me. And it sounds, saying it out loud, it sounds crazy, but I felt like actual pressure on my head, like it was coming after me. And at that point, I have this spirit guide that always presents himself to me in the form of an owl. This time he shows up as an eagle, and he wraps his wings around me and takes me away. And I learned his name, and Simon, I'm going to tell you his name, but I'm going to bleep it out for my audience because I don't think that I'm supposed to say it for whatever reason. But he told me that his name was, which is important for later.
Right. Okay.
So fast forward a little bit down the road after this experience. It was kind of weird. It kind of freaked me out a little bit. I wasn't expecting it to happen. I'm regressing my friend, and before every session, it's kind of like a little ritual that I do. I call in my guides, and before this happened, I kind of just thought it was just this little ritual and that nothing was really happening or anything like that. But I take my friend down into like a little safe space, and then he goes into this cathedral. And this was before we even went into any past lives or anything. This was just kind of establishing a little safe space that you can come back to. Pretty common practice, I guess, among hypnotists. But he goes into this cathedral, and I said, "Is there anybody there with you?" And he said, "Yeah." And I said, "Well, who's there?" He said, "Well, it's this guy, and he has fangs, and he has black wings. They're really, really shiny, and he has a cloak that goes down past his legs. And he's just floating in the corner of this cathedral, and he's staring at me." I said, "Okay, well, ask him what he's doing there." And then he goes, "He doesn't know why he's here." And I said, "Okay, well, ask him his name." And I swear I had never told my friend the name, but he said his name's.
It's one of those weird coincidences that makes you suddenly stop and think, what is going on?
Yeah, I got chills up my spine. And then what was even crazier was he told me, like, "This is your spirit guide." So where did that come from? You know? And sorry to just go off on that story, but it's really interesting, and you're a hypnotist, and so you get that weird things happen like this sometimes.
Yeah, and the spirit guides can present themselves in any way they want to, can't they? So your spirit guide had chosen to look like that for a reason.
Yeah, and he scared my friend at first, but then he's like, apparently he took him by the hand, because I took my friend to an elevator to take him deeper into his own subconscious. And my spirit guide was just holding his hand, apparently. And he was like, "He's really nice." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, he is, isn't he?"
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I've talked to a couple of people who've had near-death experiences, and one of them, he was in, he died, and he found himself in this graveyard, and there was a guy there who was really well dressed, looked like he had a lot of money, and he had these 4 massive dogs, and he set them on this guy, and he had to fight off these 4 big dogs, and in the end, he won the battle. And this guy, he realized, was death. It's like the angel of death or whatever. And the angel of death smiled at him and says, okay, fair enough. I'll see you again sometime. And the guy who had the near-death experience said, you know what? He was a really nice guy. I'd be happy to go for a beer with him. And it's such a weird thing to say. And it's like you're saying that guy, that spirit guy presented themselves almost like a huge bat and sounded really scary, but actually they were quite a nice person.
Yeah, that's weird. It's so strange. Like this, everything once you get into it, it's everything is just, there's nothing that, I don't think I've had a normal past life regression for maybe like months and months and months, like 6 months, maybe. It's all been weird stuff.
And people who don't know anything about it would just say a basic one is weird stuff.
Yeah, well, when you're coming into it, you're expecting a past life regression, like, oh, I was a farmer and I fell in a well and I drowned in the well and I missed my family or whatever. But then you get into it where it's like, okay, I just got ripped apart by a sasquatch.
Yeah, and that weird idea that you'd moved into the afterlife realm, so to speak. You're a spirit now outside the body, but still it could see you.
Well, what's interesting about it is that I wasn't him. I was myself. So I was myself outside of his body, watching him get torn apart by this Sasquatch. He killed the guy. The guy died and left his body, and then the Sasquatch looked at me, Ian, there, and like attacked me. Like it knew I was there, I guess.
Yeah. It's just strange how these things happen, and people could say you're just making it up. It's just your imagination. But then there might be some little confirmation that comes later, and that makes you think twice about it. But also these things happen to us, or they happen to you, and when you experience them, they have quite a big impact. But you can tell somebody, like one of your best friends, and they just shake it off and say, "Oh, it's just this or that." But actually, for yourself, it was a real moment where your brain just stopped dead, and you just can't make sense of it.
Yeah, and it's shocking, some of them, and another kind of piece to this thing as well. I talked to some hypnotists or hypnotherapists that have been doing this for, decades, like 20 to 40 years long. And a lot of them has been saying, like, yeah, when I first started doing this, I would do regressions for people and they would be normal day-to-day lives. Right? If you're familiar with Dolores Cannon, she would call it picking potatoes lives, just like very, very standard average lifetimes. Yeah. But a lot of them have been saying, like, yeah, in the past 5-6 years, things have been getting really, really weird. People have been experiencing some really weird stuff. And for the majority of the time, it's not like a normal past life. It's weird stuff. So I wonder why that's happening too. And obviously I'm just kind of throwing this around in theories. I have no answer, but it's interesting to talk to someone else who's kind of a practitioner and get their take on it.
I've seen some weird things. I've also seen a lot of those potato picking lives. And, I did one the other day and somebody found themselves at a church, and it seemed to be somewhere in Eastern Europe a few hundred years ago. But then they suddenly just shot up into the sky and started flying. And it wasn't, they hadn't died or anything. And it was suddenly they were in this spirit form, and they were gone, and then they left the planet, and then they were entered this what you would call the afterlife space, and it was all white, and the spirit guides were there, and it seemed almost like the spirit guides had said, "Oh no, we've seen enough of that life now. We need to talk to you." And that little thing seems a bit weird to me. But it's I talked to Peter Smith, who used to be the director of the Newton Institute, which was Michael Newton's institute.
Right. Yep.
And he said that over the last few years, recently, they've spotted in Life Between Lives sessions that it's going off track because, with Michael Newton, there was a certain set of things that you would do there, and not everybody would do all of them, but there'd be the Council of Elders and you choosing the next life, choosing the body for the next life, and meeting your soul group and meeting your spirit guides.
Yeah, very organized.
Yeah. Recently, they've been seeing other things happening. But I say that, and I can't remember what you said was happening now. I mean, there were still the usual things, but it was going off track a bit.
And that makes me really, really wonder, like, what if that's true, right? What's going on? Like, why are things changing after decades and decades? Like, obviously, time probably doesn't really matter outside of our experience, I guess. But, like, why is it changing now?
Yeah, I don't know. Some people talk about raising the vibrations of the planet and moving to 5D and these things that sound pretty woo. And I can't get into that stuff. And they say they see evidence of it happening, but I don't see evidence of it happening. And because it's the thing where I started the podcast and I had knowledge of lots of this stuff, and there were certain things that were just too far gone for me, which I didn't really want to talk about. But over time, I've learned more about them, and then I've had my own little experiences, and I start to think, well, you know what? I think there's something to this. And one of the things about that is angels. But when we talk about angels, that sounds, again, it's like a religious thing, and you imagine somebody with big wings and a robe. But I think what they're saying when they say angels, it's like an energetic entity like us, like a soul, but some soul that hasn't actually incarnated anywhere, and they have a different role to play in the universe. But oh man, I've lost my track now. What was I talking about?
We were talking about like moving to 5D and like how everything is kind of like shifting. Even people who were working with the Newton Institute are seeing these weird subtle changes.
Yeah, and so what I was going to say was that there are certain things that I've seen, like the angels, which I would never have talked about before, but now I'm interested in it and trying to work out what's going on. But when the thing with 5D and raising the vibrations of the planet, I still can't get on board with that. I don't see any evidence of that. And also, it's like you say that if time doesn't exist in the afterlife, how would that relate to time passing on the planet and things changing over time? This is when it starts getting complicated and it starts doing your brain in.
Have you ever looked into any of Dolores Cannon's work at all?
I haven't. I have been regressed. I did a past life regression with a woman who was trained by Dolores Cannon. She did the quantum healing hypnotherapy, and she was close to Dolores Cannon as well. She nearly joined her and traveled the world with her teaching stuff, teaching all the processes. But in the end, she didn't go because she had some kind of a weird spiritual experience that said, no, that's not your path.
I'm sure if that woman was close to Dolores Cannon, she may or may not believe this. But Dolores Cannon was talking about before she died how Earth is that same exact thing, like shifting into a different state of being, and how it's like moving into a higher dimension, I guess. And it's interesting to look into, but I'm kind of in the same boat where I'm just like, I don't know about that, man. Because she's like, people's diets are changing. They're not going to want to eat beef or pork, but that's not really happening.
And it also seems like more extreme views are becoming more mainstream in not just like in the UK. We had Brexit, and there seemed to be some the people who were voting for Brexit. Some of them seemed to be a bit racist, and it became almost a thing like, oh, well, it's an extreme view, but we have to take it on board because it's part of the Brexit debate. When normally you'd think, no, we don't have to take that on board. Racism's unacceptable. And then you see a big division in the United States between Trump voters and Democrats and people who don't support Trump. And some of the Trump supporters have quite extreme views, and some of them are quite nasty. And then there's this thing with the Taliban taking control of Afghanistan, and there's a lot of nasty stuff that they do. So I can't see how the whole planet's raising its vibrations and getting better, and when all these nasty views are just so prevalent everywhere.
One thing that again, going back to Dolores Cannon, one thing that she would talk about is how there's a lot of people who are going to change, like shift and start to change, but then there's people who are going to kind of fall back and go back into these less civilized views, and they're going to fight against it.
Yeah, I've also got this idea that the reason we incarnate is because we're here to learn everything there is to be learned about being human. And part of that is suffering. So if souls want to learn and progress, we'll always need to have suffering on the planet for that progression to happen, because they've got to experience suffering and also being the perpetrators. So unless all the souls go beyond that, I can't see that we'll be leaving that behind.
Yeah, and that guy that wrote that one book, the Finding Jordan book, he was talking about that. He was talking about how, I think he said that the sole reason we come here basically is to experience pain. I can't help but disagree with that, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, because you're here to experience everything, and pain's just one of those things.
Yeah, and it's like it's almost like, and I get it. The guy lost his son, and I can't imagine that's a very horrible experience, right? And I would never want to downplay that or anything, but like it seems to me a very pessimistic view when people kind of talk about like, hey, we're here to experience pain and suffering, and I'm like, okay, but what about like joy and sadness and excitement and fun and boredom and sex and drugs and all that other stuff? So
yeah, it's all part of the human experience, and that's why we're here. I was talking to a guy called Shepherd Hoodwin, who's got a couple of really interesting books. The last one I talked to him about was a book he's got called Compassion for Evil, a Metaphysical View. And that was an interesting book, because it was saying, that like we're on Earth, we'd call certain actions evil, but for the soul that's outside of the human experience, as having an overview of what's happening, for them, it's a learning experience, and it's beneficial for them.
Yeah, I actually talked to this woman named Courtney Starkey, and she was talking about how this one time she did mushrooms, and she had all of this like this experience with like negative entities, I guess, or like the darkness is what she calls it, kind of like what you're talking about, like evil or darkness or whatever you want to call it. And she was like, I didn't even think that it was really a thing until I did this. And she was like, I have a lot of compassion for them for this darkness, because I understand that it has a role to play, and so that person's not the only one who has that view. It's really interesting that there are multiple people that look at it like, yeah, they have a role, but don't feed into it, I guess.
Yeah. And I talked to a guy called Richard Martini, and he's a really great guest, a great talker. And he was talking about, he was making a documentary, and he was filming Michael Newton at one of his training sessions. And one of the people that went into a past life was a a guard at a concentration camp, one of these Nazi camps. And they said it was a lot harder for a soul to choose to be one of the perpetrators than to be one of the victims.
I've had this conversation before about like choosing to come here and hurt other people. It's a really hard thing to talk about because it makes you seem like a bit of an asshole.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. If you just it makes you look a little crazy too, and especially with people who aren't familiar with this kind of a concept of like maybe we do choose to come here and hurt people, but people don't understand like why that would be a thing, and so they just look at you like, okay, well, you're crazy. But if you think about it, if you want to learn and experience everything life has to offer, you would have to hurt some people to do it. And as bad as it sounds, I feel like I sound so crazy, and when I'm talking to you, I just feel like I'm sounding crazy.
Yeah. This is where karma comes in as well, and karma isn't something I've done a lot of study of, but I see it as it's not about bad and good, it's about balance. And so it's not a thing where if you're nasty to someone, then it will come back on you as a kind of punishment. It's just if you're a victim and the soul wants to learn about that, then it will have to also be the perpetrator to get the balance, to learn about both sides and to equal the karma.
Yeah, I've heard about that, and I've also heard about the concept of the creators too. I've experienced this in my own regression, where supposedly the goal is to get to the point where you can create your own. And again, I'm sounding crazy, but again, you can create your own life and your own worlds, your own universes, and stuff like that. But and I made this point before: if you're going to create your own life, like say I died and then I've graduated, like, yay, I graduated. I'm going to go and create my own universe now. But I don't know what it's like to experience happiness or sadness. Basically, the whole concept behind this is you have to experience everything that there is to experience so that you can have authority when you use it, when you're creating other things, if that makes sense.
Right. Yeah, I see. And I also feel like it may be a thing where when you are no longer incarnating on this planet, you graduate to become a spirit guide, and you can't guide other younger souls through lives if you haven't experienced those things yourself.
Yeah, and doesn't Michael Newton talks about that too, about how you shift your energy into like through different colors until you basically like get absorbed back into source or God or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I don't know what Michael Newton said about it, but I've heard that people say sometimes they meet the spirit guides in the past life regression and they just see them as an energy being. And sometimes they might say, yeah, they're white, but there's little flecks of red keep showing up, or purple or green or something. And I've always thought that probably represents something. There's a reason there's these different colors. And I was taken through a Life Between Lives session, and I went to the Council of Elders, and it looked like a Greek amphitheater with all these people in the Greek robes, but they all had different colored sashes around them, and the colors represented different things, that they were guiding me in this one particular thing or that particular thing. So that was interesting. And I did a session with Richard Martini where he took me through that as well.
That is interesting. I have never even encountered the Council of Elders in my sessions at all.
Yeah, because it's the Life Between Lives thing, isn't it? Do you take people through Life Between Lives sessions, or is it that you do the past life? Yeah.
I've done Life Between Lives, and the closest I've ever got is having people look at, I don't know if you've heard of this part, but like they have almost like little blueprints that's the only word that they can use to describe them. They're not blueprints, but it's like the closest thing where they look at basically like plotted out points that they've pre-decided, like this, I'm going to learn this lesson at this point. This is kind of the blueprint or the plan I had set out for my life. Where did I follow it? Where did I deviate from it? How close did I get to learning my lesson? Did I accomplish blah, 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 blah. And they're just looking at this and just kind of reading these like books or blueprints or something. And then they start to create a new blueprint for their next life. That's the closest I've gotten. But there was no council of elders. There was, the guides were there. There was guides, but there was no like council. And maybe I just I don't know. Maybe they just didn't want to show the client that, but I don't know.
Yeah, because I'm not sure if because I don't do life between lives, and I'm not sure if it's a thing where some people are trained to do it, and they say, right, we've just finished looking at this place, which might be the place they call like the healing temple or something like that. Now we're going to go to the council of elders, and they direct the person to that place. And I think some other hypnotists may just sort of say, okay, where are we going next? And leave it to the client to say, oh, it seems like we're going over to this place. And
that's more, the second one is more what I do, because of the way that I started doing the hypnosis. I never say, okay, we're going to do this now, unless of course there's like, they're in a traumatic situation or they're stuck somewhere or they need that. I'm never like, okay, now we're going to go do this and then we're going to go do this, because I personally feel that's not the right way to do it necessarily, because you're giving suggestions, and I feel like it makes it a little bit less authentic. But that's just my personal view on it.
I suppose in a way as well, it might depend on the client, because if you have a client who's read all Michael Newton's books and knows all about life between lives and the different places you could go to, they might know, oh, I know this place, I want to go and check out that place. But if somebody's with you who doesn't know really the makeup of a life between lives session, and you're not suggesting anything to them, then they don't know what to expect. And I suppose it's more interesting when they say, oh, I'm at this place now, it seems like a council of elders, and they'd never heard of that before. So that's kind of spontaneous little bit of confirmation of Michael Newton's stuff.
Exactly. And I mean, I don't know how comfortable you are talking about your hypnosis process, but when I do it, I never, ever make suggestions about where we're going next, ever. The farthest I go is what I do is I use the Hall of Mirrors technique, because I really like that one. You take them down into like a safe place. You take them into a little structure of some kind, but you let them create this whole scene, right? So they're creating their safe place. They could be like a garden or a meadow or a beach or whatever. And then they go into this structure, whatever it is. Could be a temple, could be a cabin. I've seen a lot of cabins actually, which is kind of weird. Yeah. And then there's a Hall of Mirrors, and they kind of go to a mirror. After they get to the mirrors, I just let them take it away. I don't make any suggestions at all.
Yeah, what I do, it depends where it is during the session. But if we're in a past life and we're seeing a scene and there's something happened and it seems like, right, okay, that's run its course now, we need to move on from here. And then I say, okay, we're going to move to another event in that lifetime that's related to your current life. And then we just see where they go. We don't suggest,
right,
we're going to go and see the bit where your father was violent, or we're going to see the thing that happened with your child. There's no suggestion like that.
Yeah, same here. Well, there comes a point where they're kind of stuck and you're like, okay, what I like to do is I like to say, okay, we're going to basically like almost press fast forward on your life. And then you just press play on the next appropriate scene. And that seems to work really well, actually.
Yeah, that's a good one. I mean, there is a part where I say, when we're getting towards the end of the session, I'll say, if it's appropriate, we can go to the end of this past life and we'll find out what happens there. And then we go through the death of the past life and we go into this afterlife space. And I say, okay, well, this is a point where your spirit guides might come forward and show themselves. And sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. And I don't say to them, oh, they're definitely coming. Can you see them? Can you see that bloke with the big grey beard? That's your spirit guide.
Yeah, like I can see that. I always like to talk to people about their process. So what I like to do, and I know you offer your own past life regression hypnosis on your website. You got the podcast. So if you just want to plug all your stuff, your website, your podcast, what do you got going on?
Well, the website is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk. And on there, the homepage is a kind of portal page that you can go in two directions. You can go through where the podcast is with all the episodes, or you go the other direction and it's the past life regression and past life regression therapy. And there's a booking page there. You can book a free consultation call with me on Zoom. And there's a booking page there where you can go into the calendar and choose a date and time that's good for you. And then we can talk about what you would want to do if you wanted to do a past life regression. Because some people just want to do an exploration, just see what turns up. And other people are looking for therapy. And so depending on what they're looking for, I can do different types of sessions and we can target therapeutic outcomes. And the podcast is the Past Lives podcast. And that's, as I said, up to nearly 190 episodes. Each one's an hour-long interview. And I have a Patreon campaign where there are extended episodes there that go about an hour and 20 minutes or an hour and a half. So if you're really into it and you want to hear the rest of the interview, sign up on Patreon. And I guess that's it.
Yeah, links to those are going to all be in the description as well for anybody listening who wants to go check those out. If you feel drawn to work with Simon, go ahead, book that consultation call. He has a really wonderful, nice, silky, chocolatey, smooth voice. So head on over, check out that podcast. Again, links to those in the description. And Simon, before we end the episode, do you happen to have some kind of a message that you'd like to share with my audience? If not, that's totally fine.
Well, there's a little thing that I heard somebody say, which it sounds a bit funny, but it sounds good to me, is that you should always keep an open mind, but not so open that your brains fall out.
And there you have it from Simon himself. Well, Simon, thank you very much for coming on my show. It was a very interesting conversation, and I really appreciate you sharing your time with me.
It's been really good. It seems like only 10 minutes. I've enjoyed the conversation so much. I can't believe it's an hour.
That's it for today's episode. I would like to thank Simon for coming on to the show, and I would also like to thank you for tuning in. Head on over to the Past Lives podcast. Give Simon your support. He's a really great guy. Also, head on over to my Facebook, my Twitter. You can interact with me there and get some show updates sometimes. If you like the show, I'd appreciate you subscribing in your podcast player and sharing the show around with anyone you think might be interested, or even someone who you think would be interested in coming onto the show. If you're interested in coming onto the podcast and talking with me about your experiences, send me an email. My email is theregressionsession@gmail.com, and I would love to have you on the show.